Allô, allô. Nous allons commencer dans 2 minutes. Est-ce que nos deux partenaires médias nous ont mis à disposition 2 ouvrages? Je ne sais pas si on vous les a distribués à votre retour de déjeuner. Si on ne vous les a pas distribués, il en restera à la sortie. L'après-midi est à peu près aussi dense que la matinée, donc on va démarrer dans très peu de temps. Xavier, tu peux mettre la salle ? Donc avant de donner la parole à notre ami de New York, Neal Stimler, je voudrais vous faire part de 2 partenariats que le CLIC France va avoir en 2016. Le premier partenariat est avec la Bibliothèque nationale de France, représentée par Véronique. Véronique est-elle Véronique? Bonjour. Le CLIC France a souhaité accompagner la Bibliothèque nationale de France dans sa démarche de dépôt légal des dispositifs numériques de valorisation du patrimoine artistique, historique et scientifique. Notre objectif commun est de préserver les outils numériques d'hier pour mieux imaginer ceux de demain. Et donc le CLIC France va contribuer à cette initiative en mobilisant ses institutions, membres et ses entreprises membres associés à apporter, à contribuer par leur contenu, leurs innovations numériques, leurs logiciels, tout ce qui a fait la médiation numérique d'hier, afin de la préserver, de la partager et de la mettre au service des chercheurs, des institutions et des professionnels. Donc l'équipe de Véronique a commencé ce travail et nous, on va l'accompagner pour l'amplifier. Donc le message est simple, vous avez développé des innovations dans le passé, à la fois en tant qu'institution, à la fois en tant qu'entreprise. Nous vous encourageons à apporter ces développements à la BNF pour que la BNF, en tiers de confiance, soit un garant de leur archivage, de leur conservation et qu'on s'appuie sur ce travail pour imaginer des outils de demain. Ça, c'est le premier partenariat. Et le deuxième partenariat que je voulais vous annoncer est le partenariat avec Wikipédia et Wikimedia France, qui cherche le Wikimedia cherche à permettre la valorisation, cherche à valoriser le patrimoine culturel, éducatif, scientifique, naturel. Et donc nous allons nous associer à Wikipédia et Wikimedia pour essayer de mieux comprendre la manière dont les institutions peuvent être dans cette démarche de participation, d'ouverture, de coopération, de collaboration, en essayant d'interroger les institutions françaises sur leurs projets passés, leurs projets coopératifs, les besoins de ces organisations afin de permettre une collaboration plus aisée et autonome entre elles, et avec des projets Wikimedia, et voir comment des outils Wikipédia ou Wikimedia ou des projets Wikimedia pourraient également répondre à des besoins des institutions. Donc les institutions membres du CLIC France recevront dans quelques jours, quelques semaines, un questionnaire pour essayer d'avancer sur cette logique de coopération entre institutions et Wikimedia France. Et Wikimedia France sera également le partenaire du CLIC France dans le forum régional du CLIC, le 3e, que l'on organisera en mars ou avril au Palais des Beaux-Arts de Lille, et avec Pictanovo et les partenaires régionaux Nord-Pas-de-Calais et Picardie, comme on l'a fait déjà depuis 2 ans. Donc Wikipédia nous accompagnera également lors de cette journée. Voilà ce que je voulais vous dire sur nos projets, certains de nos projets pour 2016. Et on va reprendre le fil de cette journée en accueillant notre 4e invité étranger. Je suis particulièrement ravi d'accueillir Neal Stimler, qui est conseiller numérique au Metropolitan Museum. Alors, je vais continuer en anglais avec mon accent franglais. Comme ça, Neal, il va pouvoir suivre. Neal is a digital asset specialist in the digital department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he forecasts digital trends, leads je vous avais dit que mon anglais, digitalisation efforts, and manage special digital media initiatives. Je continue en français. Neal est particulièrement impliqué dans toutes les problématiques de collection, de numérisation des collections, de dissémination et de partage des collections. Neal va parler en anglais, ça va être votre exercice anglais de la journée, il en fallait bien un. Il va parler lentement et son sujet sera notamment réseaux sociaux et collections, mais il va également, évidemment, nous parler de la manière dont le Metropolitan Museum organise ses projets numériques et dans quelle direction ou dans quel genre de démarche le Metropolitan Museum est actuellement. Et après son intervention, nous aurons quelques échanges en anglais-français, en français-anglais, avec Neal pour prolonger cette rencontre. Donc je vous demande d'accueillir dignement Monsieur Neal.
Thank you all very much. As Pierre said, I am Neal Stimler from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and I'm going to speak to you today about an introduction to the Metropolitan and our digital department, and also speak about museum collections at the Metropolitan, and in particular on the social media network Twitter. Here's me again, and all of my contact information there. So first, I'm going to tell you about the digital department at the Metropolitan. We are a staff of 70 people. We cover multiple areas of production in the museum. So we create apps, video content, digital images. And this is the mission of our department. We create the public-facing product and profile of the museum. And you can read more about this in the blog post listed below, written by our Chief Digital Officer, Sri Srinivasan, and our Deputy Chief Digital Officer, Loic Talon. Here are the 5 new challenges for the department, articulated by Sri and Loic earlier last year to the department and to the broader museum. These are the areas of responsibility we have within the museum to work with every department, curators, conservators, registrars, communications, to serve the museum. I also encourage you to follow Sri and Loic on Twitter, and you can also follow the Metropolitan on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. You may be interested to know that on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, we have over 1 million followers on each platform. So I wanted to show you our 2 main spaces of the Metropolitan on your mobile. One example we have here is the Android version of the Metropolitan Museum app. This app provides visitor orientation, collection highlights, also information for our members, and events of the day. Most of our museum website is also accessible on our website, metmuseum.org. The site is mobile, and you can search many of the features that we have on our main desktop site there as well. And one of the features I'm going to be focusing on today is the one at the bottom, the Search the Collection. So in honor of my colleagues here in France, I've selected a Rodin sculpture from our collection to show you. So this is the Search the Collection. We have over 400,000 objects in our online collection. Our collection in the museum is over 1 million objects. Here you see an example page, which has the information about the object in the collection, and a detailed image. Most of our images are 4,000 by 4,000 pixels at 300 dpi, which is a very high-quality JPEG for study and education purposes. We also have a special licensing structure, allowing people to use images that we call the open access for scholarly content. And this means that researchers and scholars can use our images without having to ask additional permission. This is for works that are in the public domain, so there's no copyright on them. Pierre asked me to mention some of the other projects that we do to speak about our collections to different audiences. So the three that I featured here are made by my colleagues in the Online Publications Department and the Digital Learnings Group. To the far left there on the screen is the Heilbronn Timeline of Art History. This is a digital online encyclopedia. It was created before Wikipedia became popular, and it is written by art historians, scholars, and researchers who work at the museum. Our newest online feature is called the Artist Project, and this is run by the Online Publications team led by Teresa Lai. In this project, artists in New York and from around the world have been invited to walk the spaces of the Metropolitan, to go to our study rooms, and reflect personally on their experiences with works of art. The project features short videos, usually 2 to 3 minutes long, and you can watch many of the seasons at once. The idea is that it is meant to be consumable, either from email or on your mobile phone. So a quick experience with a work of art that might renew your day. The third initiative is called #MetKids. This is a special video series we have, which focuses in pairing a curator with a small child, and they have a conversation back and forth about an artwork or a part of the museum. So it's very fun. I am a friend and collaborator of the Met Media Lab. This is the experimental hub and heart of the digital department. It's run by my friend and colleague, Marco Castro. And at the Media Lab, Marco works with researchers and scholars both in New York and around the world to explore new technologies and ways that the collection can be used. One of the projects that Marco has been working on is featured in the picture there on the Met Media Lab blog page. It's called Coloring the Temple. In this example, we worked with our Egyptian art department to do projection mapping onto the Temple of Dendur. The Temple of Dendur is an actual Egyptian temple that was brought to the United States block by block and reconstructed. It was a gift from the people of Egypt to the people of the United States, and we are the stewards of it. With the Egyptian department, Marco and some of the researchers we had were able to begin to understand what the color of the temple was before it was damaged over time and flooding. And so the projection mapping you see is a hypothesis, it's an idea of what the colors on the temple might have been. And so for the second part of my talk, I'm going to discuss my interest in collection data and images, moving on to social networks, focusing on Twitter as an aesthetic and information experience. So one of the main ideas that I'm very interested in is the work of Lev Manovich. He is a digital humanities scholar at the City University of New York. He is an expert in image visualization and digital software projects. He wrote in 2001 about the idea of infoaesthetics. Infoaesthetics helps us understand that information might be beautiful, and it might influence, the beauty of information might influence our experience of works of art and collections. Another point to consider looking at the collection we saw before and thinking about social media is knowledge enhancement. This is part of a digital curation process. In the United States, there's been a great deal of discussion about what digital curation means. We still haven't defined the term completely yet, but one of the ideas behind it is to think about the information and the knowledge around a collection object and the websites and resources we produce. And if we think about Twitter or other social networks as a knowledge enhancement process, the conversations that happen with scholars, but also the public, are knowledge enhancing when they're discussing museum collections. One of the challenges here is that these conversations are happening outside of the museum. And so it's valuable with social media to think about how we can reincorporate those voices and experiences back into our own collection data. One of the key terms I would offer as well is museum informatics. And this comes from Professor Paul Marty, who's at the University of Florida. And he talks about museum informatics as the social technical interactions that take place between people, technology, and museums. I think this is probably the most important term I would offer you today. So many of us have been working in museums, cataloging our collections, creating data for some time. We have online collections. But social media has really changed the relationship that we have with the public and our scholars and researchers. So the key for museum informatics is to think about the importance of the experience of information. I want to talk to you about a really great Twitter initiative that's based in New York. It's called @ITweetMuseums. It's run by my friend and colleague Mark Schlemmer. And that's the hashtag. If you look on Instagram and Twitter, and whenever you see @ITweetMuseums, you'll see really exciting conversations happening with museum professionals. Mark is a registrar at the New York Historical Society and started this project on Twitter to get people excited about sharing in museum collections. In December of last year, Mark and I hosted an online Twitter chat for about an hour that focused exclusively on museums sharing their collections. Many museums use social media to promote events, to share exhibition information, but our focus was to look at how we talk about objects in our collections. And one of the unique things that we did in this chat was we used Twitter polls. I don't know if you're familiar with Twitter polls. These are a new feature where you can have multiple choices and offer an audience a selection of viewpoints that they can give feedback on. Our highest response rate for one question was over 100 responses. We were trending in the United States and Canada during the Twitter chat behind a verbose politician. And it was very exciting to see the interest across North America in this chat. We also had participation later on from Germany and the United Kingdom. The Twitter polls were available for 24 hours, so both our colleagues in Europe and as well as Australia were able to participate in the chat. We've archived everything on a platform called Storify. If you haven't had a chance to use that, I recommend it. It's a way to create a curated selection of social media posts. So now I'm going to talk about something that's a bit more experimental. I showed you some examples before of our collection website and the projects that the museum itself has developed to tell more about its collections to the public. My interest in Twitter and thinking about how information is shared and images are shared and distributed is now focused on what I'm calling glam bots. Glam not as in glamorous, glam as in gallery, library, archive, and museum. And to describe what a bot is a software program. It's an algorithm created by a creative developer. And in the case of glam collections, these creative developers are taking information from museum websites, or in some cases where an application interface is available, pulling data and images from there, and making posts publicly on Twitter. The reason why I focus on Twitter in this example is because Twitter has an open API. It allows engineers and creators to use its tools to build new things, somewhat different than other social networks. I've collected a list on my Twitter profile, if you click on it, of 50 such bots that exist now. There may be more being created every day. In some cases, the bots are simply reproducing label text and an image. In other cases, it might be something a bit more poetic. In the example that I have on the screen, you see the strange logo that seems changed from the Museum of Modern Art. This is called Bizarro MoMA, and it was developed with the MoMA and a developer once the MoMA released their collection data openly. And so what it does is it takes object information and reformats it in sort of nonsensical terms. It's sort of a data approach to collection data. And the example below is a simple link to a title, a persistent link to the collection, and an image. Some of these bots have thousands of followers. And I think people are becoming just more aware of this trend and this interest with social media. And it makes me think, too, about what the future of collections dissemination might be, how we might actually experience collections beyond the context of an exhibition or a scholarly publication. The chief example that I want to show you is MuseumBot. This is one of the first Twitter bots created, and it's actually a Twitter bot that takes information from the website of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. As I mentioned before, we have our open access policy for educational use, and the developer here, in this case, Tiny Subversions, takes images and data from our website and reposts them 4 times a day onto Twitter. I follow all of these bots on my Moto 360 smartwatch, So my wrist is a constant buzz of collection information from 50 institutions across the world. So I really try to live in the environment of this information and data. I'm thinking about in the future with algorithmic curation and bots, if we have several thousand people or 100,000 people that come to a large-scale exhibition, how many millions could we reach with bots? It might be a challenge for museums to pivot, to move in this new direction. But one of the interesting things about this as well is that this data is measurable and scalable. Many of our physical activities still don't have detailed tracking and don't take full advantage of the interconnectedness of the web. And I want to thank especially the French-American Culture Society, which made it possible for me to be here and speak to all of you. And I hope that I'll get a chance to speak with you each after the session. And if you have questions, please feel free to contact me on Twitter. And I'm more than happy to entertain any ideas that you would like to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Neal. Perfect. I have questions, but maybe I can allow someone first to ask question about your presentation. Yes. Yes.
I have directly linked to your presentation, but I have a question about, you mentioned videos at the very beginning of your presentation, and I was wondering what was like the growing importance of videos on social medias for museums, and I guess what kind of videos we can share on the social medias? Is there do you have some advice for us regarding
Certainly.
those things?
So we are now working at the Metropolitan on a new digital asset management system, which stores all of the digital assets, including video, for our collection. The Met has been making film and video for over 100 years. We were one of the first people to experiment with, at the time, color slides, and then color film and television. And we have terabytes of video that are ready to be stored. So we have high-resolution formats that we recode into usable pieces for social media, like YouTube videos, for example, or Vimeo videos. There is interest, I think, as well with social media to experiment with Vine and Periscope, which are also Twitter tools, for short interactions in the museum. There are many museums still in the United States that do not permit the use of video. My sense is this policy is more of a sense of the past, a memory of large television crews coming in versus video on your phone. And as we begin to think about the collection on this interface as the primary interface of the museum's first point of contact, moving images are very compelling. So I would say if you have the opportunity to plan video as part of your digital asset strategy, it's a good idea.
So I have a question. In your presentation, you mentioned several ways, or at least 2 ways, of giving more value and more distribution to your artworks database. Can be, we were speaking about that yesterday and during the lunch. We can do manual usage by doing, for example, the video by artists who are speaking about their feeling about the collection. So this is manual, and you have the automatic way, like dissemination, both dissemination of the collection. How do you see the combination between these 2 ways of giving this greater value to the collection? Can we just do these automatic things which doesn't have a human feeling, which is like a robot, which give? So do you think that we can only do this, or that we need to do some like a balance between these 2 ways?
Certainly. I think the first thing to consider is that bots are a creative act. They may not appear to be, but the creation is in the code. It's the creative developer who is the artist, and the code is the art. So it is a creative process, and to create these bots is a manual process. It's not something we see in the interface necessarily. I think we'll continue to have very boutique projects in museums. We have many talented creative people that enjoy making these types of projects, and they do add value because they are well thought out and executed. But I think it'd be also very compelling, especially for new audiences that expect more of a direct interaction with data and the visual environment of social media, to also invest with the museums ourselves in supporting developers with open data, open assets, and allowing them to create new content in response to the museum. So rather than it just being the museum to the public or to the scholar, there's a collaboration.
Co-creation.
Yes.
And are you, at this moment, the full collection database of Met is available on API for any usage,
No.
even commercial usage?
No. Our current offering is open access for scholarly content, which means for non-commercial educational use. There are many museums, both in Europe and the United States, that are beginning to make more available. It's something that we are also following and interested in. But the bot example I showed you happened without our having an API at present. So
how can they access to the...
there are ways of getting information off of websites, people know.
Okay.
But the policy for our terms of the images is that they're open. So it makes it available for this kind of educational use.
In France, there are even outside France, I imagine, but there are some debates about what is the best social networks for museum. Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? What is your feeling at Met? Are you investing equally in these two networks? And on your boat strategy, is it only usable on Twitter, or it can be used on any social networks, including Facebook?
So the Metropolitan Museum itself is invested in several social networks: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and we also have legacy content on Flickr. On Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we have 1 million followers on each platform, and we're working equally across the museum to work on these various social networks and communities. It may surprise you to know that our social media team is 2 people for the entire museum. They're amazing, Taylor Newby and Kimberly Drew, and they do a great job. My personal interest in Twitter as a platform is that because of its openness, it allows for creative development. There's also features of Twitter that are more compelling, I think, for a humanistic or scholarly conversation around Twitter, in that you're able to post a link to a specific item, and the reformatting of data and tags is more interesting. And in terms of my research in the United States, we have a whole section of scholars working in digital humanities or art lab centers that are having public conversations about their research on Twitter. So for my interest in professional community, it's more compelling. And I think it's also valuable for museum professionals in the United States. If you ask most of them, where are they having these conversations similar to the Click conference, they're happening daily on Twitter in between the meetings and gatherings like this.
So you would say general audience is maybe more on Facebook, and
well, at the Met, it's equally distributed, I would say. Because different people have different interests. The challenge is with Instagram, for example, from a collections theory standpoint, is you can't link. There's no links. So I prefer to have a link back to the collection as a researcher. And the challenge with Facebook sometimes is information doesn't appear in the same frequency rate for each user because of the calculations there. And it's also possible to focus on individual objects, but Facebook, depending on the user settings, could be more closed or more open. So Twitter tends to be more open and more accessible to researchers.
You spoke about Media Lab, which is very linked to our conversation of this morning, to create a new space for experimentation, for a connection with research organization and so on. What you mentioned the project, nice project with the temple. Do you have other projects now which are directly connected to the collection, your main area of work?
So I would say every project that the Media Lab undertakes with Marco Castro's leadership is related to the museum's collection. Frequently, when researchers come to the museum to work with the collection, a curator or a scientist will be present at the first conversation. So the collection and the science and the research is always at the heart of the projects of the Media Lab. And the exciting things coming up, Marco's having some new interns and classes starting this time of the year, so we'll see what comes next. There's an excellent blog we have called the Digital Underground blog, which features the digital department's projects, and you can find a lot of the projects of the Media Lab there from the past and the future.
Is there some... Super.
Bonjour, je suis Lisa Paoli du Musée d'Art Classique de Mougins. Hi Neal, thanks for your presentation. Just a very simple question. You said you have over 1 million followers on each of your social network platforms. Do you know, is it like, is it 3 million in all, or is it the same people follow the same? You have the same followers on Facebook as on Twitter. And then my second question is: are you very specific? Do you put different information on Twitter than you do on Facebook and on Pinterest?
Sure. So it's 1 million followers per platform. So 1 million Twitter, 1 million Facebook, 1 million Instagram. It's a little bit more than that. And our social media team does create different content experiences on each of the platforms. So our Twitter tends to focus often on exhibitions and also tweeting objects. Facebook may be an object and it may be a major exhibition. We actually have multiple Instagram channels. I was just mentioning the highest Met Museum branded channel. We also have Instagram projects distributed throughout the museum in conservation departments, in libraries, and it's a way for staff to participate. Our Chief Digital Officer, Sri Srinivasan, is very enthusiastic about social media, and as is our director, Tom Campbell, who's on Instagram. You can follow him and see his journey around the world. So social media is a very big part of the digital department's work. But going back to the connection, for lack of a better phrase, the collection of the museum and the exhibitions that we put on are key to filling those social networks with information, with content. So it's important that we think strategically about the collection first, and then we can think about how we distribute it and disseminate it across the world.
Hi, I'm Annalise Pacheco from Rio, Museu do Amanhã. You talked about the app for Android. I was wondering if you have for iOS too.
Yes, it was first developed for iOS. So it's available on iPhone and Android, and it's very fun to use and simple. So I'll show you an example here, but you probably can't see it from the audience, but it's the Met app. So if you go to the Google Play Store or the Apple iTunes Store, you can see our app. And it's an app that is connected very much to our mobile website, which I showed next to the app. So parts of the app have content that is only in the app, and then other aspects of it link out to our mobile website. So for example, our entire audio guide is available for free on the mobile web. So if you're visiting from abroad, if you go to the Met, we have free Wi-Fi, and you can sign into the Wi-Fi for free, and then you have access to over 2,000 audio stops without having to buy a device.
Are you doing indoor geolocalization for this app?
Geolocation is not part of this app. Okay. We have gallery information for certain objects that's contextualized. Our building is very complicated, much like the Louvre or many of the museums here in France, where we have different building materials from over 100 years of expansion. So geolocation is something we're still working on.
There was another question, or maybe not. I have another question. When we first met in the States,
yes,
you were always wearing a Google Glass.
That's right.
You don't have your Google Glass today.
Yes.
But you have a nice bow tie.
Thank you.
And a nice
3D
watch.
printed.
3D printed. Wow.
Yeah.
So why you don't wear anymore your Google Glass? Were you disappointed by Google Glass? Do you still believe in this tool? And what about the other wearable?
Sure. So I was one of the first Google Glass explorers in the United States, and I traveled to Denmark and Italy and throughout the United States to demonstrate it to museum professionals and colleagues. I am and remain enthusiastic about glass as an information experience. I think it's very valuable for museums in that your visual experience is connected to looking at works of art. So you can look at a painting and have contextual information, much like a printed label, in real time in front of your eye. And you can also add rich media experiences like video and audio. And so rather than having museum patrons looking down at a screen, they're looking at the work. They're looking at the collection, which is, I think, what a lot of curators want too. The Glass Explorer project ended earlier last year, and so the device that I was wearing is no longer being further developed. But I'm still enthusiastic and hopeful for future iterations of the device or other wearables that are coming. So the experience that I have on my watch is the same content experience I had on my glass display. I had not worn a watch in 7 years before this watch because my old watch didn't do anything. This one gives me all the information. I see many of you have been tweeting. I have 36 new tweets on my watch to read when we're done talking. And so each of the messages that I receive on the watch shows me a preview image, actually very much like one on the screen, along with the text. So I am filling my life with aesthetic information from museum collections. And for me, the museum experience is something that is embodied, it is worn, and it's not confined to a building.
You're kind of bionic person.
Yeah, cybernetics.
Very strange. Is there some does Met do some app for the
So
wearable
we're-
or any outside company?
So we're experimenting with wearables. We haven't done any public projects with it yet. I think it's something that people are just beginning to understand and test. So I've had the watch for probably over a year now. I wear it every day. It's very useful to me. I rarely take my phone out of my pocket unless I have to respond to a message. Otherwise, I'm just moving through a content stream. I think we have to understand and prepare for people coming to museums with a suite of devices, with multiple devices. And so preparing for that means having free Wi-Fi. It means having charging stations so people can charge their devices. And it means thinking about our points of sale. So it's very important to have ticketing for lectures or for the entry of the museum, and connecting our commerce experience also to wearables. As an example, when I boarded my plane to come, I could check in my flight with my watch. And I also can shop on Amazon on my watch. So if we want to think about the kind of content and the commercial experience, these are important trends to consider.
And in our view, or in the view of the Met, do you want to control the way you disseminate the information and your collection, or are you like a Rich Museum, for example? Rich Museum, they decide to really give full control of the use of the database to companies, even if the companies are doing business. And as a result of that, the official app of the Rich Museum as competitor other private or commercial app in competition with the official app. But they consider that it's okay.
Yes.
Are you sharing this conception of really free access to the database?
So our current official museum policy is the open access for scholarly content. So we don't yet encourage or support commercial reuse of our content. That's being said, we are aware of the landscape, the Rijksmuseum as an example, or in the United States, the National Gallery of Art or the Getty, and also the Walters Museum. So we're observing these trends very carefully. As a scholar and researcher, personally, I'm very supportive of open access and find that having the additional creative capacity of people outside the institution makes us better, helps us to see the collection, the work that we do in new ways. And part of the challenge moving forward, as the example with the Twitter bots, is understanding that the way that we express that public use is different with digital tools than it was with analog tools. So if we're thinking about a creative and educational environment for a public in the 21st century, that relationship will be different.
And open access is very often connected to another question, which is the economic model. And mainly the revenue streams from audio guide, for example, which are sold for example, in French museums, or they are part of the ticket. But there is, behind the audio guide, there is an economic model.
Right.
Or in other museums, there are some photo library licensing activities.
Right.
Do you have to cope with this balance between commercial activities of the museum and open, the dream of everything is open and free for everybody?
Sure. So the specific examples of the audio guide, while we make all of our audio guide stops available for free via the mobile website, we do also still rent devices for people that don't have a phone or would like to rent the device.
So they rent the device.
There is an
content.
option, but it's not, there's two options. We have a public option from your own device, and we have the museum-provided device should you want to choose it. In terms of the imaging practice, we have already made the shift to this open access for scholarly content because we found that many of the art historians, especially who we serve, they may need just a few images to write a scholarly journal article, which has always been part of the museum's mission in our publishing and our journals. So that's really connected to that. I think we'll continue to see in how this evolves and shifts, but the benefits, I think, from a creative and educational standpoint are by making things more available and open, you have discoveries you could never possibly do. It was only really after other people were creating Twitter bots that I started to see institutions create their own. Two other great examples I would like to point you to are from the Cooper Hewitt Museum, which is a Smithsonian museum in New York. They have two Twitter bot projects, both of them by my colleague Micah Walter. called Curatorial Poetry, which is, again, a poetics of metadata. And they also have another bot, which is from an RSS feed called Recently Digitized. So every time a new work in the Cooper Hewitt collection is digitized, it immediately goes to Twitter. And so it's a way of them sharing their collection in an automated fashion. It demonstrates the progress of the museum and making the collection available. Exactly. So those are the examples I'd offer.
Last question. They are sleeping a little bit because they have lunch in France. So I have a question, maybe last question. You have spent 2 last days in France.
Yes.
You met different people from museum.
I did.
In France. What is for you the main difference of strategy, approach, organization, feeling between your personal view or the Met view and the French view?
Well, the first thing I have to say is that I'm incredibly appreciative of the generosity and the welcome that I've received by all my colleagues here at the French museums. They've all spent time with me and walked me through their museums and taught me about their projects and practices, and so I thank them all very much. I think there's a lot of similarities in the issues that we face in terms of the institutional challenges we have, both with social media and collections. So we have a lot to learn from each other. I've learned a lot from colleagues here in terms of ideas around 3D modeling and scanning that we're interested in exploring. And I've also been really inspired to see how very small teams can do exceptionally well. So I appreciate their tenacity and courage in doing so. It is different in terms of an American experience of the museums. We don't have palaces, and so the scale of the collections is also very interesting to me. So at the Met, for example, we're a very large museum, but I was surprised to see the liberty of leading the people. I didn't realize how large it physically was. I mostly experienced it through images and books. And it was really stunning to see the scale of the Louvre, to see how magnificent it was among the other museums that I visited. So in the United States, we look to our colleagues in France with great admiration and excitement about the work that they do. And I know the Metropolitan very much enjoys its collaborations with museums here.
Thank you very much.